So, folks, thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to share my screen, he says, hopefully, just briefly, and then we'll go back to looking at real people. Hopefully you can see the big orange slide that says the empathy gap at the moment. Brought to you today by us at Schwa. I think we know lots of you on the call, but for those who we don't know, we are a group of writers and trainers and psychologists, and we try and help solve business problems. Often that's by looking at the way businesses communicate, but it's other things too very often. And the reason why we're here talking about empathy, you might have seen in the past few months, we've been a little bit obsessed with it in our blog writing and the stuff that we post on LinkedIn and Twitter. And it's because we noticed over the last 6 months or so, lots of our clients were asking us about it, how they can come across more empathetically to their customers, or maybe their colleagues, if they're feeling very brave, how they don't just look at their communication, but also the processes to make them more empathetic. Some of them seem to be doing it because they want to, some of them maybe under a little bit of duress. Jason, would you be able to mute yourself maybe? I think we're getting a little bit of noise.
You know, you're not likely to have the empowerment or the confidence to go, no.
Brilliant, thank you. I always get intrigued by these little snippets of conversation. So yes, so that's why we felt like we should do an event about it, because it feels like it's in the air. Hannah, one of our colleagues who's on the call, even produced a report measuring the empathy of the communication of various banks. And we might have a look at some of the thoughts in that later on. So we thought we would convene a group of people who we thought would have something interesting to say about the subject. I'm going to introduce those in a second, but first of all, a few requests for the rest of this. Switch your video on if you can, if your bandwidth can take it, just because it helps all of us to see how you're reacting and if we're making sense. If you go for speaker view, you should be able to see the person who is talking at that moment. Mute yourself if you're somewhere noisy, if you're not talking. At that exact moment, a van has decided to drive down the road in front of me and I've got my windows open. But if you're somewhere relatively quiet, stay like that. But we would also love to hear from you. So pretty much whenever you like, feel free to unmute yourself, comment, ask questions, argue, as it says here. We're going to start off hearing from our speakers a little bit, or our panel. I'll ask them a few questions, and then there'll be definitely time for any questions from you, the audience, which you can unmute yourself and ask, or you might prefer to do it in the chat. But if something is gnawing at you and you need to say it earlier than that point, then feel free. So, just so you know who you're going to hear from, you're going to hear from Georgie Helps, who is part of the team responsible for communications to customers. And I guess the customers are us, taxpayers in the UK. So for those of you not from the UK, HMRC is Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, the organisation that collects our taxes. So we're going to hear from Georgie. We're going to hear from Beth, who's in customer operations at Monzo, and probably in terms of an organisation, maybe at the opposite end of the spectrum to HMRC. And I said, as part of our team, we have writers and trainers and also psychologists. So we're going to be hearing from Patricia de Jonge, maybe a bit of the theory underpinning this stuff that we're all trying to practice in day-to-day life. So I'm going to stop sharing so that we can see each other. First of all, is that all making sense? Everyone happy so far? Thank you for ostentatious video nods, thumbs up, all of that kind of stuff is really useful. Right. In which case, I'm going to go to Georgie first of all. And I've asked everyone on the panel just to tell us, first of all, a little bit about their role. And just when I said empathy to them, kind of what springs to mind in their organisation. So Georgie, tell us.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay?
Perfect.
Brilliant. I love the nods. It's great. I feel so powerful. Right. So I'm Georgie. And thank you so much, Neil, for the introduction. I'm a customer comms business partner for HMRC. Been invited here today. Really pleased to be here to talk you through our plans for raising our game in the empathy stakes when we're talking to our customers about the wonderful topic of tax. So to set the scene briefly for you, we reckon there's around 24,000 people across HMRC that send out an estimated 95 million letters across our top 20 tax types each year. So that's pretty phenomenal stats right from the start. To add to the challenge, we deal with a huge variety of different customer groups. Our staff have different levels of knowledge. Some are frontline, some are behind the scenes, and 67,000 in all. So it's a very big organisation to try and get through. And we have a huge variety of different systems, producing letters, both bulk that go out to millions of people at a time, or bespoke that might go out to one person. And finally, a number of different routes to training. So bringing in a new way of working or thinking is no mean feat, as you can imagine. Our senior leaders are really keen that we bring a more human and approachable tone to the way we write. And so my team, Direct Customer Comms, was set up in early 2020 as a way to take a more strategic approach to improving how we write to customers. When the pandemic hit last year, it really served to speed up the need for us to change the tone of our communications. We know from research that many people are now finding themselves in debt for the first time, possibly ever. And as a result, they're often worried, understandably, about their financial situation, and they might be anxious about contacting us as well. So what have we done since the team was set up? Well, for our sins, we've edited over 700 different letters. I mean, that's just, as you know, just touching the tip of the iceberg. And we've learned a great deal about the varying approaches to direct customer comms across different parts of the business. We've also audited the many, many strands of existing training and guidance on how to write for HMRC. We found there's lots of great guidance out there, but it's scattered and confusing for staff. And so we've had an aim to create one simple overarching set of guidelines for writing that could work for any part of the organisation. And crucially, they're tied in with our customer charter, because that's so much of what we're doing is around customer service. So we've been debating with the business, very much so, what these guidelines should be for a good few months. My colleague Laura, who's on the call today, has been integral to that process, and we finally decided on 4 overarching principles. So one is to give customers the right amount of information in a logical order so they understand what we expect from them and what they need to do. The second is about making our letters easy to read by using natural everyday language and thinking about visual impact by using white space and headers. Third is around assuming good intentions by using straightforward and supportive language. Bit tricky when you're dealing with serially non-compliant people, but you know, we try and get there. And finally, the reason I'm here today is about showing empathy in our letters, because ultimately, if we can show customers that we're aware of and understand their situation, they're more likely, hopefully, to trust us and engage with us in the future. So the next thing was, how on earth do we teach our colleagues to write with empathy? The huge financial impact of the pandemic means it's never been more important for us to try and show that we understand our customers' circumstances. So the first thing we do is simple things like personalising, simple techniques such as using the customer's name at the start of a letter, doesn't always happen, and personal pronouns such as I and you. We also refer to ourselves as we and us rather than HMRC in most cases, and we advise our authors to sign off with a real person's name. Just basic stuff, but it just makes us seem more human and personal. We also try and include information about the customer that we know where possible. We do a lot of segmentation, and if we've segmented our customer base accurately, then we could confidently say to a customer, our records show that last year we didn't receive your self-assessment tax return on time. We want to help you file on time this year so you can avoid a penalty. So it really brings them in. This hopefully makes our communication more relevant, and also is hopefully more likely for them to prompt them to act on it. So we use phrases such as we know and we understand. And when we're working with clients to create letters, we ask them to think about the reaction they want a customer to have when they read a letter or email. It's the feel, not just the know and do, but the feel. If we want the customer to know what support's available, we can include supportive language such as, we understand this bill might be unexpected, or if there's anything about your personal circumstances that may make it difficult for you to deal with us, please tell us so we can try to help. We explain clearly why things are happening. For example, we're doing this because we didn't receive that. And we encourage writers to include signposting to extra support, guidance, fact sheets, leaflets and phone numbers. Crucially, they're really important for building that relationship and making people feel they can come to us. And finally, we know customers can maybe sometimes think we might sound a little bit rude because we have a tendency to go straight to the point. So we try and build in some, more conversational language and use words such as please, thank you, and also sorry where necessary, rather important. So in terms of where we go from here, we're hoping to launch our writing guidelines later this year, and we're building umpteen e-learning modules, starting to think about writing clinics, interactive training. Hopefully we might be able to get face-to-face with people at some point, which would be so exciting. And we're obviously keen to measure the work that we're doing to see whether it's had an impact. So we're closely following a project our in-house behavioural insights team have been working on to gauge the levels of empathy in the conversations our frontline complaints teams have and the letters they write to customers who've complained to us. Obviously a very touchy subject. The team come up with a measurable scoring system, which we're quite excited about. They basically spent several months talking to the complaints team staff about knowledge gaps, created a simple set of 4 indicators. Sorry, my computer's just gone off and I lost my notes. I was doing so well.
You mean you don't know your 4 indicators by heart?
I really don't.
They're not like up on your wall in front of you?
Such a heckling, it was dreadful. And I'm too stressed out and I can't remember my password. Right, sorry.
I'm sorry, I thought that was supposed to be our role. I'll tell you what, Georgie, why don't you find that?
Right. So they create a simple set of 4 indicators, which are very similar, luckily, to the principles that we've got. So 1 is around taking ownership, 2, tailoring your approach, 3, using active listening, or maybe even active writing, trying to listen to what someone's saying, and 4 is around providing clarity and reassurance. So staff complete our tailored e-learning module that the team developed, and then attend classroom sessions or group exercises. Once they've had all the same baseline training, the behavioural insights team will go and look at their letters, listen in on their calls, and score them on the service they provide. So you get a score of 0 for no apology if you're around taking ownership. You get 1 point for I'm sorry you're upset, but you get maximum 2 points for something like I'm sorry this has been a stressful situation for you. It's clear we haven't provided you with the service you expect. So in conclusion, the team are now looking to trial their scoring system with our debt management teams. So debt management's a really big issue for us at the moment. And hopefully we'll start to see some measurable results to just prove, really prove the reason for the existence of all this great work. We're just at the beginning of the journey, but luckily our leaders and staff seem to be keen to get involved. So fingers crossed that it's looking good. And hopefully the aim is if you get a brown envelope coming through your letterbox one day or an email from us, it won't be quite scary, as you would expect. And that's me.
Thank you, Georgie. And just to pick up on that last point about training people, how do people take to being trained to be more empathetic? Or did they think they were empathetic anyway?
Well, that's the thing. The first 2 elements of the writing guidelines are very much practical skills. It's about the words in a letter and how it looks. The second 2, assuming intentions and empathy, it's really tricky because it's more about in here, it's heart necessarily rather than head. And so I think, I was really pleasantly surprised that most people seem to get it. The problem is that you'll find people who are quite jaded. Our compliance teams deal with serially non-compliant people, and they will get quite hardened to it. Also, if people have been in the organisation for a long time, they might get quite wedded to doing things in certain ways. I think what we're trying to do is just find various different approaches and offer lots of different routes in. So, someone might prefer an e-learning, someone might prefer a face-to-face writing clinic. And we tend to find if we sit with them and talk to them long enough and lock the door until they've got it, we don't do that obviously, then they tend to get it. And if they don't, then what we're hoping to do is really enlist the support of their managers and team leaders to create that kind of cushion of empathy around them, so eventually they'll be swaddled in empathy and be a bit more positive about the outlook around customer behaviour.
Right. There's already some really good questions coming in on the chat, and I'm going to try and field them a little bit at different points. So if I don't take your question now, it's not because I'm ignoring it. We might well come back to it when when some of the others have spoken, but a simple one, it's not a simple one, but it looks simple, from Jacqueline, says, how do you or how will you measure the success of what you're doing, Georgie?
Yeah, so obviously the behavioural insights example I gave at the end, it's stolen from a different team, but I think it's really interesting in that we're looking potentially to do some automated tools, because we've got so many, 24,000 people. How on earth do you start to look at that? And we need to get those measurable results. So there's something to do with, having the benefit of a large organisation, albeit we're not awash with huge amounts of budget working for government, but there are some really passionate people in the organisation who are coming up effectively with little letter factories. You can push a letter in and it will assess it around keywords that are used. So that way you can have automation. I think as well, we're really trying to plug into, the nature of the complaints that come in. We've got a huge complaints team that manage that. So they can help indicate, some of the types of issues that are coming in. We're also looking at end-to-end journeys in terms of taxes at the moment, which is something that is quite unique. Things are split across different silos across the organisation. So if we can follow the process, see that something's been improved at one point, and basically sit at the end, but like flushing out a ferret from a hole or something, see how it comes out at the end. I love my word analogies, I apologise. I think that's the thing. We need to focus down in on key areas. So self-assessment is one that's really big. Millions of people have to put in self-assessment returns each year. They get quite stressed out, they're worried about money, they make mistakes easily, they've got accountants that are dealing with it. So if we pick one part of a process, then hopefully we can get deep into that and then start to focus on those key areas. So I think it's about working top down in terms of the big hitters, looking at those end-to-end customer journeys and really focusing in. And hopefully over time that will help us develop some more useful measures that will work on a sort of more widespread level.
Great. And at Schwa, with our clients, we're always trying to do that. Can we actually find the end result that proves it was worth spending the time and the money on the change in between? Great. Thank you, Georgie. There are more questions for you, but I'm going to hold fire for a little while. I'll move over to Beth. Kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. So Georgie's got 24,000 people just writing letters. Are there 24,000 people at Monzo, Beth, even?
Not quite. No, I think we're about 1,500.
Yeah, there you go. So Monzo, lots of you on the call might be very jealous that Beth works at Monzo, often gets held up as a fantastic example of a modern bank, often really highly recommended by customers. So tell us what you do, Beth, and how is this question of empathy different at Monzo?
Thanks, Neil. Hi, everyone. Really happy to be here. So yeah, as Neil says, I work at Monzo. For those of you who aren't UK based, Monzo is a new bank within the UK. We got a banking license about 4 years ago, and we have about 5 million customers. We offer current accounts as well as business banking accounts. And I work in our customer operations team. I'm a senior manager for customer experience, and I lead a team which we call the product partners team, which is basically there to make sure that all of our amazing product teams at Monzo work seamlessly with our 1,000 people strong customer operations team, which is sometimes not as easy as it sounds. Day to day, that can take quite a few different forms. So when we're developing new products and rolling them out, then we'll work really closely with the product teams to develop the support that goes alongside that, or if we're making changes to the product and that might change the support that we need to offer, we'll be making sure that that's all synced up as well. And then we also share back all the insights that we're getting from customer operations and customer support interactions with our product teams. So we can see what customers are saying about what they find confusing or what they don't like, sometimes what they do like, which is nice, and make sure that that can be thought about in our product roadmaps and what we're changing and developing as we go. And then finally, my team also design all of the customer operations processes as well. So that's from the help content that is available in the app through to what our customer support agents, which we call COPs. I will try my hardest not to call them that, but it's a bit ingrained. So COPs as agents at Monzo, I suppose. So the process that they use to support our customers as well. I've been at Monzo for 5 years, always working in the customer operations team. I started off as a COP myself, so I've pretty much seen the whole journey of how we've created our customer support experience, which has been a really wild ride from, about 10,000 people when I started to 5 million now. So it's had to scale up fairly quickly in 5 years. Yeah. And then onto the topic of empathy. So when Neil first asked me about this, like, what does Monzo do about empathy? I was a bit stuck. I was like, I don't even know. Like, but I think that's because we don't explicitly talk about like how we can be more empathetic, but that's because the nice thing about being a new company is that you can ingrain these things from very, very early on. So empathy is something that maybe we don't explicitly talk about how to do, but there are at least 2 key things that I think come out as like showing that we have empathy. First off, like our mission is to make money work for everyone, and we really care about people and how what we do impacts people, both for our customers and our team at Monzo. And that's a real cultural thing that we look out for in interviews and everything else like that. And also secondly, writing is our primary contact method. So we are an in-app bank. We don't have any branches. In-app support is our primary support method over calls. So like that's how we create the connections with our customers that we have. So from day one, it's been really important to us that we have good communication with our customers. We do have an amazing writing team who is led by Harry Ashbridge, who I think is a friend of Schwa's, and he's been really important in like from day one, making sure that we're thinking about writing carefully. But that being said, it's there's a few proactive things that we do. So in our onboarding training, there is a how to write betterly session, which I love the name of, which gives us a little bit of the tips of like the tone that we like to use at Monzo. And you can sign up to extra sessions with the writing team if you would like to. But other than that, I think it's done more through like the cultural and the practices that we use day to day. So our internal comms, I would say, or a tone of voice is no different to our external tone of voice. Also, a lot of our internal communication is done through writing. Even before the pandemic, we were probably about 50% remote already. So we were prolific users of Slack. Our Slack usage is a bit terrifying. And therefore, like, we are writing a lot to each other and learning how like different people interpret different ways that you write, if you're short with people and things like that. So we're getting that feedback a lot of the time. And we call each other up on things like using acronyms, even in our meetings, and our like Slack posts that we put out. Because we know that that's confusing. And why should you say insufficient funds when it just means you don't have enough money? And as long as we're talking about in that way internally, it doesn't mean we have to like switch on our external tone voice when we're going externally. For a lot of our kind of proactive comms that we're putting out there, the emails that you'll see, generally these are written by the product teams or the teams developing the products, but then our writers will come in and have a look and see if there's any of the general principles that they can help, and they are really invaluable in that way. But a lot of the writing that you'll see within the app, like the help content, for example, is all written by my team, who aren't like, Neil also asked me, like, do you think of yourself as writers? And I was like, actually, we do a lot of writing that's out there in the public. We also have safe responses that our customer operations teams use for our kind of like reactive comms in a way, our support interactions. Again, this is all written by the customer operations team who've had that initial training. And yeah, and with the customer operations team, as I say, like they are the main touch point with our company. That's like the interactions that we have. They use the safe responses, but that doesn't cover everything. So I think the other thing is that we recruit for empathetic people quite proactively. Our customer operations assessment center days, we have like case studies where we give them situations and ask them what they would do for different customers. And there we're really looking out for things like, are they really looking under the surface of what this customer is asking for and what situation they're in and what situation this could put them in? And are they looking out for any potential vulnerabilities and how do they react to that? We did a couple of years ago one of the like Myers-Briggs insights studies, and it was either amazing or not amazing how many of our customer operations management team came out as very, very green. So the people focused, impact focused one, which shows that either our hiring was doing a great job, but potentially we don't have enough diversity, but that's potentially a different problem. But at least
that's a different session we're going to run, Beth.
Okay, great, perfect. So yeah, so I think like it really comes down to people, hiring empathetic people, and then really caring about writing and understanding how important that is to us and our connection with our customers.
So it's really interesting to me when we did this study of how empathetic banks sounded. Monzo, how do I put this? We're very near the top. As it happened on our sample of things that we happened to pick, you were number 2, but still very high up and not much in it. Yet when we had our first conversation, you were saying, oh yeah, we don't really talk about empathy explicitly. Clearly, when you're hiring, you are testing for it and looking for it. Are you also testing people's writing when you're hiring, given how much of that they're doing?
Yeah, great question. Yes, so we have like take-home task, because it's all in-app. We need to understand how, like what kind of writing people are able to do. So yeah, our tasks, that kind of is the first stage that you do before you get through to next rounds. Generally have like a writing task, which say like write a proposed response to this, and there we're looking out for those things as well, like how well they communicate. Yeah. Great.
And I'll take one question from Rose before we get psychological. Rose says, does Monzo use chatbots? If so,
great question.
how do you make them empathetic?
We've tried chatbots ourselves. We actually have decided that for our strategy, because we're all in app already, we think we can do a lot of it through the help center without kind of like going into the app experience and then giving the save responses. Like hopefully we can do it all there. So we're more help center focused first instead of moving to bots, but it's the same kind of principles where like we try and write these FAQs and deliver them in the right places at the right time to be able to help customers without having to go to a human.
Great. And probably a question that we're going to hear a lot. Do you think you can measure the impact of those empathetic people?
Yeah, really good question. So we're thinking a lot about like our actual intentional strategy for customer support. I think we've done a lot, like been lucky up until now that we've kind of like thrown everything at it, and therefore it's been really well accepted. But actually what parts of our customer experience or support experience are the things that customers love is like we probably have a gut reaction to, but we haven't measured and known yet. We look out for like in our like quality assessment scorecards that we use for all our customer operations staff, then we have like a tone measure in there, but we haven't yet be able to like link that up to like another output measure of like, do customers think that, does that correlate to satisfaction or anything, or NPS like that yet? So not yet.
I guess there's an interesting question for the group here, that the business that we found, one of the businesses doing this at the best, that's not English, but you know what I mean, isn't talking about it explicitly and isn't measuring the results. It feels like it's just very culturally ingrained, I guess. How easy is that to hold on to as you grow, Beth?
Yeah, I think that's one of the challenges, and why I'm like also eagerly sitting here, and I'll be writing notes for the session as well. I think that you have to continue, like you have to continue to want to invest in hiring those types of people when we've had to scale very quickly and maybe hire quicker than we've wanted to. We've probably seen that come out, and whether that's I should probably say that comes out in like more like ownership of work, and therefore not thinking about how that then impacts the customer. So like if you're transferring things away because it's easy for you to do and those types of things, I think that we've seen that come through a lot more as well. And but yeah, so far I think that like some guidelines and things like that are like really important, but then when you see them in all of our Slack interactions anyway, every single day you're seeing examples of good writing coming through. I think that's a useful way to keep people kind of like learning naturally without being too proactive about it.
Great, thank you, Beth. There are more questions, but like I said, we will come back to some of them. So let's maybe take a step back. I don't know if that's fair. I don't know if it is a step back, but you know, out of the cut and thrust of being in this every day to maybe some of the theory behind some of the things we're talking about. So, Patricia, you're a behavioural scientist. Tell us what you do, first of all, and yeah, what are you thinking when you listen to these conversations so far?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Thanks again, everyone, for keeping your cameras on. It's like, this is the first time I feel like I'm not talking into a void, and it's great. And I see the occasional cat passing by as well, which is even better. So yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I'm Patricia. I'm an applied behavioral scientist. So I spend part of my time doing academic research and then part of my time working with clients. I help them define behavioral targets and understand why their employees or customers are not doing stuff that they want them to do or doing stuff that they don't want them to do. And then figure out what the barriers are that we need to take away to make sure that the desired behavior is actually happening. And what I always find really interesting is that whenever we want to change behavior, there's this tendency to focus on the individuals and sort of see it as a problem of maybe a lack of knowledge or a lack of good intentions or a lack of awareness, when actually one of sort of the main lessons of behavioral science is that it's really important to look at the context in which people operate. So I really like what Georgie said about like assuming good intentions. I always try to assume good intentions, and especially with a case like empathy, because empathy is a very natural human trait. I mean, we've evolved to be empathetic. So your employees are empathetic. Maybe they're not showing it at their job, but that's a different problem, right? So what is really important is to look at things like your organizational culture and your incentive structure. And also, and this is often where there's a lot of like low-hanging fruit, your internal procedures and processes and formats and templates and stuff like that. Because being empathetic should be the easy thing for people to do. It shouldn't be like the thing that requires them to use exemptions or ask their supervisor or spend lots more time on things than they would have to do otherwise. And especially because being empathetic is quite exhausting. Like it means, like the definition of empathy is feeling other people's feelings, which is quite emotionally taxing. So if you don't make it really easy for people to do that, they actually have a pretty good reason to avoid doing it. So, and actually I'm really impressed if I hear Georgie and Beth talk about how they've sort of either like incorporated it in their organizations from the start, or how they're sort of trying to find out what needs to change to make it happen, doing things like audits, trying to work on indicators that they can use to measure progress. Those are all like really great initiatives, I think.
So when you said, you know, we tend to focus on knowledge, for instance, I know you're being very nice about what Georgie did, but when you hear people talk about training, for instance, are you skeptical of that compared to making the processes easier, for instance?
Yes, I am. Like not in the sense of like teaching people very practical skills, but trying to teach people in general to be more empathetic. That wouldn't be like my first choice. No. I think in general, what you tend to see is that trainings are pretty good at changing knowledge and pretty horrible at changing behavior.
I'm just going to let that one hang there. Several people on this call are responsible for training. So what should they be doing instead? I mean, you gave some practical examples. Are there others that spring to mind?
I think the first step should be to make it very concrete what you want your employees to do. Like being more empathetic is way too broad a goal to sort of use to create behavioral interventions. Like what is it that you want them to do? Do you want them to spend more time on each customer? Do you want them to make more use of exemptions that are possible? Do you want them to be more considerate of financial problems people are having, being a bit more lenient perhaps? So what is it exactly that you want to do? And often this is a surprisingly difficult stage, actually, for organizations. But once you have that, you can use it to figure out why it's not happening. You can start doing interviews, you could do observations, you could use any in-house data you have. You can audit your processes to try and see, okay, so what's stopping people from doing this thing we want them to do?
And also, I was thinking about Georgie's point about their different audiences at HMRC. So, you know, if I really oversimplify, you know, we've got lots of people who probably will just go along with paying their tax without thinking too much about it. We've got some people in genuine difficulty who are struggling to do that. We've got some people actively choosing not to do it and trying to avoid the system. If I'm working at HMRC, am I likely to be equally empathetic to all of those people, or should I be?
No, I think if you know someone is sort of knowingly trying to cheat you, I wouldn't be empathetic. But I do think it's a risk if you're doing that type of work too long, like if you always have to work with a very small percentage of people that are like willingly not paying their taxes, you're probably, that's going to probably influence sort of your view of humankind, maybe even. And that's probably not a healthy thing, like for your personal well-being, but also for like your capability of showing empathy at work.
And empathy, I guess, presumably is quite open to bias.
Very, yeah.
That way.
So I think that's an important word of warning, like from the behavioral science perspective. You don't want to end up in a situation where your employees have complete freedom to be empathetic with whoever they choose to be, because empathy, as it has evolved, is, as you said, it's very biased, where it's very easy for us to feel empathy towards people who are attractive, who are articulate, who look like us, who sound like us. I'm much less inclined to be empathetic towards people that we perceive as being part of the out group. So what that means, first of all, is it's another really good argument for increasing the diversity of your employees. But it also means that you need to have sort of checks and balances just to make sure that you have fair outcomes for everyone, regardless if they happen to be sort of similar to the customer support employee they happen to like reach on the telephone that day.
So I'm really interested in Beth and Georgie's perspective on how they feel their teams are towards those out groups. Just before I do that, there's one question which I couldn't resist putting to you, Patricia. So Misha says, so interesting that straight to the point, this is something Georgie said, can be construed as rude. I think this perception could change dependent on culture and demographic. And, you know, forgive me, there's something about you being Dutch that made me want to ask whether you being straight to the point as rude.
Oh, yeah, well, I think we've made it a national sport, right, to be straight to the point in the Netherlands, which is very often perceived as rude when Dutch people try and work in other countries. It's definitely a cultural thing, yeah.
Thank you for taking my bait. Any thoughts on those groups that are difficult to empathize with and how you help your teams do it?
Yeah, I probably have a couple. So the structure that we have at Monzo, and maybe it's to do with us being very, very new, and therefore it's great to hear like that maybe we should be more intentional about this. So in our customer operations team, customer operations covers kind of general support, but it also covers all of our FinCrime processes and our financial difficulties processes and collections processes, everything like that. And generally cops are multi-skilled, which means they don't just do one type of work. And I think that does protect a little bit against this kind of like everybody who we work with is a criminal, and therefore I'm going to talk about it in this way. We do see when people specialize a bit more and spend more time in that way, I think sometimes those kind of tendencies coming back when they come back onto kind of like support interactions, which I think is helpful. And then equally, like we do have kind of specialists in the banking industry working in each of our product teams, but our product managers are generally like fairly like topic independent and might move around different teams as well, which I think probably then also protects it too much about kind of like potentially that vacuum or echo chamber that you get of thinking like feeling one way about a particular set of customers. So making a note of that, that's probably something that we want to hold on to if we take it seriously.
Yeah, and I guess to follow up from a HMRC point of view, quite often we do kind of have to, especially at the stage we're at, the early stage with this, you know, empathy isn't something that's been talked about widely at HMRC before, I don't think. And if it has, it's probably in very small areas. The segmentation that we have is important in that, so throughout coronavirus, for our debt management customers, they've been segmented by low, medium and high ability to pay, as in financial impact from the pandemic. So we would probably write quite differently to someone still in a nice professional way, but you'd write differently to someone who's been probably done quite well out of the pandemic. If they sold hand sanitizer, there's no excuse for them not paying their bills. However, if we know that they've worked in the entertainment industry, we really need to be quite a lot more empathetic and understanding with them. So there's something about segmenting your customers and adjusting that, so you've got the evidence behind you to say why you should do it. In terms of, you know, our compliance teams and fraud investigation, once you deal with the real baddies, ultimately it's about being professional. It's tied up more with the assuming not even assuming good intentions, just being professional and businesslike. You're not rude, you're not aggressive, you are straight to the point, and you get done what needs to be done, but you don't resort to patronizing language or anything that sounds even remotely aggressive. We still have to remain impartial, even if you've been so imbued with hatred over the years for all these nasty people you've got to deal with. I have no idea what it's like to work in a compliance team, but I should imagine that it would be quite a hard sell sometimes to write a letter when you know that someone's just continually, you know, doing all the bad things that get splashed all over the newspapers all the time. And it is hard, and it's probably quite emotive for those people who are writing those letters to try and separate themselves from the issue. So I think in those cases we do just try and go for the middle ground of just be professional and straightforward, and we'll leave a lot more of the empathy skills for the people who need extra support, who we're worried about. I'm constantly amazed working through the vast amount of people at HMRC who feel really passionately about what they do. And I have to take that as stick it in your pocket and remember when you meet someone who's a bit jaded, for good reason, that there are people who are really passionate and they're focusing on the right people that need it. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at, I think.
Patricia also said something interesting about, you know, we've evolved empathy and we all have it. We've had this debate with some of our clients of do they need to define it so that their teams understand what they're talking about? I don't know if any of you have a view, and anyone in the audience either as well, for that matter.
They have to make specific what behavior they are expecting from their employees. I don't think they need like another definition of empathy.
I think that's right. I think it's about role modeling, rewarding it in your like progression conversations and those types of frameworks as well. Interestingly, like I would love Patricia's opinion when you're talking about like training probably doesn't work, but is there a distinction in your mind between like training and coaching? Is coaching more effective in potentially developing empathetic behaviors?
In the sense of like sort of a long-term working with people to show them what you expect of them. Do you mean that by coaching?
Yeah, so I guess in my head I was thinking about trying to like think about how we coach or train it with people, and I think it like we do, like the managers will obviously go through conversations, and then they've spotted something that it probably felt non-empathetic, they'll have those conversations and like their development chats with their team, and that feels to me more like coaching.
Yeah.
And therefore I'm wondering whether you think that is effective or actually maybe not, and it's not going to work either.
Yeah, so I haven't seen the research, so my sort of the science-y part of my brain is now cautioning me to be careful about what I say. My assumption would be that it is more effective. Like when I talk about trainings not being effective at changing behavior, I'm really talking about sort of the one-off, let's do a entire company training on empathy. Or as, for example, like one-off trainings on diversity and inclusion and implicit bias are really notorious for not having any effect on behavior or even having adverse effects on behavior. So that's sort of the type of training I like be cautious about, to put it mildly. I shouldn't be putting things mildly, Neil, should I?
No, but like you said, you can't stop being a scientist.
Yeah.
And kind of related in my head anyway, this point from Amelia, who says, we've definitely got people engaged in empathy, but have a segment of people that think I'm already empathetic. This isn't relevant for me. I don't know if any of you have any experience of that, and if you've tried to tackle it or how you tried to tackle it.
I don't think we've had cases of kind of people thinking that they're empathetic, like saying they're already. I think we've definitely had cases where people haven't really understood or bought into the fact that they needed to be empathetic, like that wasn't key to their role and their job. Luckily, as I say, like it is a very cultural thing here, and it is built into a lot of our our values, which are about like helping everyone belong, thinking customer first, and all these types of things. So it wasn't too hard to persuade them. But I would say that like that can cause a bit of friction as well when you're kind of saying to someone like you need to be more empathetic in the way they're working, and they can't see like the actual benefit for them in that because they're being successful in what they do. In general, in those cases, they haven't worked out in some of the customer facing kind of roles, and they're much more effective in some different type of roles. But I think that's where, yeah, like engaging someone and convincing them that they need to be empathetic, I don't know where to begin with that one.
I think from our perspective, when we're building those 4 writing guidelines, the one that we struggled with wasn't empathy. It was assuming good intentions. It was about seeing the good in people. And I think empathy is more about, you know, different types of skills and reflection. I think people may assume that they're empathetic, but maybe they don't even know what it means. Quite often just giving them the definition or just giving them in terms they understand, you know, putting yourself in someone else's situation. Or, as I said, we've got amazing data number crunching teams in the organisation who can give you a fairly realistic customer segment, present that to a consultant who's designing a campaign and say, we know these people can't pay. And they were like, okay, fine, here's the evidence. That, you know, they're all quite scientific, and, you know, people are very process driven. They like evidence. So quite often it's about appealing to the side of their brain that engages with the topic, and then they can try and put themselves in those customers' shoes. If you're asking them to ping around all sorts of different places and imagine themselves in different scenarios, then I think it gets hard. So it's about being kind of, you know, like I said before, sort of zeroing down in on the issue and focusing on trying to solve one problem at a time as well. So I think that helps us in how we do it.
Yeah, I think again, this comes down to like being more specific about what we're expecting from people. I mean, I think we've probably all been in a situation where there's some like, you know, corporate change program being implemented or new strategy or whatever, and it sort of is always introduced by the board mostly, and then people are expected to do stuff on top of their regular work. It's never sort of replacing something they're already doing. It's always something extra. So be empathetic of your employees when you're trying to do stuff. I guess that's a good thing to keep in mind. Like, they'll probably want to, but you need to give them the time and the space and sort of the practical tools to actually do it.
And we've done not long ago, actually, which was about translating something that was 4 adjectives, because it's always 4 adjectives, right? Here are the 4 adjectives we'd like you to be, and turning that into, no, here's actually what we want you to do, which is, I guess, what you're talking about. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then I'd love to open it up to the rest of you. So if you have a question, get poised to unmute yourselves. This is a really technical question because I'm a writer and I can't resist it. So Georgie, you know, you said in your guidelines that you were encouraging people to say things like, you know, we know this might be difficult, or we understand X, Y, Z. I feel like I sometimes have an allergic reaction to that stuff where I think, well, do you know me? Do you understand? Maybe I'm not feeling that. Discuss.
So I would say we don't use that approach widely. We have a number of teams within the organisation who are focused solely on customer referrals, so people who are facing bankruptcy, people who have mental health issues, people who need extra support, people who've got debt advisors. Those are generally the situations in which we would very heavily use those sorts of really empathetic language. We obviously don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. The old British thing of not letting a feeling show too much. I mean, I'm probably the opposite way. I love it when people are nice to me, but I know people find it dreadfully uncomfortable. So you have to find a middle ground. But when we're confident enough of the data, that we know that people are at genuine risk of, debt or serious injury, there's awful stuff that goes on when people are written too badly about money. It's very scary. So we will use it with caution, absolutely. But it's something that I think we try and put it across to people when we're talking, anyone across the organisation, about this, because it's about thinking outside of your little box. If you don't deal with people that need extra support, then you might forget that actually there are people out there who really will struggle. So yeah, the compartmentalising and the evidence and only using it in specific situations is probably when I'd say we'd employ those sorts of things.
Patricia, you were nodding when I asked my slightly nasty question. For any particular reason?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about how important it is to test these things when you're starting to do them. I mean, I think organizations that do this stuff really well have made that a part of their day-to-day operation. Like if you want to try out some new message, put it in front of people, see what they have to say, see how they react, and then learn from that and iterate and do it again.
And when you say see how they react, do you mean kind of in a focus group, see how they react, or see what they actually do in real life?
Yeah, so it depends a bit on what you're able to do. Like if you don't have the customer base to do like large scale A/B testing or whatever, do the focus groups and do the qualitative interviews at a minimum. If you have the skill, also do the A/B test to see what people actually do in response. I mean, having them, it's in this case, I think you want to know both. You want to know what they say about what you're doing, and you always want to know what they do in response to what you're doing. But yeah, that depends a lot on the organizational capabilities.
Yeah. And one more from me. I'm aware that given the subject that we're talking about, Georgie and Beth, you both work with money, that we're sort of assuming that this is about empathy around things that are negative or difficult. And that is the conversation that we end up having with lots of our clients. One of our colleagues at Schwa, Meg, who isn't here because she's on her honeymoon, wrote a blog actually about why don't we think about empathizing with people when good things are happening, and the power of that. I don't know, Georgie, maybe you have less room to do that in your communications. Beth, I don't know if that's something you thought about at Monzo.
I don't. So there's usually your contact. If someone's contacting us, they've had a problem, or if we're contacting them. But then again, I think like the nice thing that Monzo is like we get to celebrate sometimes like kind of the new features and therefore what it can do for them and explaining and those things. And I think that involves a bit of empathy as well, like understanding how best to explain how a feature can really help somebody and improve their financial lives. And then we do like to put a little flair, like we've got our paid early feature, which isn't just like press this button and you get your salary in the day before, like there's confetti and all these great types of things. So yeah, I think it's a really nice point that, of like having also embedding into the app or the experience at least sometimes to celebrate new things that you can do with your money.
The reason why it occurred to me actually is we were running some training, but very practical training, Patricia, for a customer service team on social media. And one of the things we looked at was how to take a compliment.
Yes.
Because actually the few compliments they got, they were sort of just ignoring because they didn't quite know what to do with. And actually we did look at some examples of Monzo being like, yeah, thanks so much, that's really sweet of you, that kind of stuff, to kind of really join in with that moment, I guess.
Yeah, it's a great work. We have a great social media social media team. They're past the custom operations team, and it's kind of like another skill that you can pick up, one of these badges that we have. And they are all have those skills of like how to build that rapport by engaging in those positive conversations as well. Their gift game is incredibly strong, and I cannot take any credit for that, but usually a gift goes down quite well of like, I'm not being too serious and too gloaty, but thanks so much, and I'm acknowledging it. So
I think responding to reviews, online reviews, is another one where a lot of organizations could take a good hard look at what they're doing. I think sort of organizations being defensive when replying to online reviews, at least for me, like when I'm just a regular customer, that's a really big sort of red flag for me when I'm trying to find a new service or a new product.
As you can probably tell, this is a topic that we could go on talking about and probably will go on talking about. So again, I'm going to share my screen in the final minute just to say, as we mentioned, we have developed our own measure for measuring the empathy of communications. Overlaps quite a bit with some of the stuff you heard from Georgie at HMRC. We did this report that some of you will have seen looking at banks. If you would like us to test something of yours and give you a score and tell you why we scored it that way, that is a little freebie that you can have from us. Get in touch after the session. And I've mentioned quite a lot other things we've written around this topic. So either have a look on Twitter or have a look on LinkedIn and you'll see all of that stuff. Other than that, thank you very much for coming, folks. This only works if we've got an audience who we can see and ask questions. So we really appreciate that. And hopefully we'll see you again.